Here's WBEN's Dave Depot.
And what a week it is to talk politics. Coming up on Tuesday is the big GOP primary. Certainly there are other races on the ballot. Who will be the Republican candidate to challenge Kirsten Gillibrand? That's a choice that you make on Tuesday if you're in the Republican Party. But around here, possibly the marquee race on that day is what will become the 27th Congressional District. Which Republican gets the right to then go on and challenge Kathy Hochul, the incumbent Democrat? You heard last hour from David Bellavia. This hour, it's Chris Collins' term. He's here to talk a little bit about the issues facing him in the race and where he thinks things are headed. Thanks for coming on in, sir.
Oh, I'm very happy to join you, and I'm glad the listeners are tuning in to talk about what is a race running under the radar right now. June 26th, Tuesday. Most people are just now learning that there is an election on Tuesday, and certainly it's a Republican primary, encourage all the Republicans in this district to get out and vote.
I think some of the reporting I've seen already talks about maybe the difference in tone, the difference in background, the difference in experience. If we set that aside for just a second and look strictly at issues, what is the biggest issue disagreement between you and your opponent?
Dave, it's not really issues. What I've been saying all along is the country's at a tipping point. We can't afford 4 more years of Barack Obama and Kathy Hochul and their disastrous big government programs. The issue in this election, I believe, is my 36 years experience creating jobs, employing 500 people in a variety of small businesses in our community, 4 years as the Erie County executive, showing we can and we did cut spending. We cut the size of government 22%, 1,200 workers, and while I hate to see anyone lose their job, I serve taxpayers. That saved the taxpayers of Erie County $72 million a year. So my resume, Dave, is the big difference. 36 years creating jobs, knowing how to create jobs, 4 years of cutting the size of government in Erie County. And what I'm presenting to the taxpayers, I believe, in a very positive message. This is my resume. We talk about the issues. In particular, we can't afford 4 more years of Barack Obama, Kathy Hochul, and big government. And that's what my campaign has come down to.
On the issues, though, there are no substantive differences, you think?
There's nuances, but David is a conservative Republican. I am a conservative Republican. If you look across at the U.S. Senate race that's being waged between George Maragos, Wendy Long, and Bob Turner, again, conservative Republicans with different resumes to take a conservative message to Washington. And I think it's my experience, proven experience in creating jobs and reducing the size of government that differentiates me the most from my opponent.
You have been a business executive. You have been the county executive. Congress, to my mind, I'd like to put forth a rhetorical argument, is really more of a communications position than an execution position. Can you say that the resume that you're plunking on the table is more relevant to a legislative position like Congress, where, again, the argument could be made it's to advocate positions and put forth issues and ideas, but not so much an execution kind of thing?
Well, Dave, if you just look back at my 4 years as county executive, it was all about communication and coalition building. Remember in 2008 when I stepped in, there were 12 Democrats and 3 Republicans in the legislature. And by articulating a vision of success in the future, 6 core values, and talking about the taxpayers, we were able to get 5 of the Democrats to basically sign on to that pro-taxpayer agenda through communication, coalition building, and with an 8-7 coalition of 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans, we sure got an awful lot done. So to me, it's a discussion of vision, mission, core values, and when you get agreement on that, you then talk about the decisions that have to be made, some of them tough decisions, to serve the taxpayers and to create a bright future for our children and grandchildren.
I want to try and go down the rest of the program here. Again, with David, we didn't take any calls because there was just so much we needed to get on the table. I'm going to try and stick to the same set of questions with you and the same list. So let's just go issue by issue. Debt and spending. Address what you think the federal government needs to do in that regard.
Well, Dave, you just hit the number one issue. We need more jobs in America. We need a balanced budget within the next 10 years, and we need less spending in Washington. To me, the interrelationship is under Barack Obama and Kathy Hochul, they have a wet blanket that is sitting on top of our economy. We've gone 4 years with no substantial growth in the GDP in America. Without growth, we don't have jobs. And the reason we don't have growth is a complete lack of confidence in the direction this president has taken the country. He and Kathy Hochul believe more spending, bigger government, and continued runaway deficit spending is okay. It's not okay, and right now small business is reluctant to invest in any kind of capital projects because that investment's for 10, 20, 30 years, and you take on debt more times than not to expand your facility. With this lack of confidence, borrowing 42 cents of every dollar we spend at the federal government, $5 trillion of new debt. Our debt to GDP, because the GDP's flatline, is the fourth highest in the world, only behind Greece, Italy, and Japan. It's that lack of confidence sitting on top of the economy that has really cut off any kind of job creation, and that's why we need Mitt Romney in with a Congress that understands we have to have a balanced budget in 10 years. We need to deal with the issues of small business. We have to reduce the tax rates on small business job creators, where Barack Obama and Kathy Hochul have said they want to actually increase the tax burden on job creators. They're going down exactly the wrong road. So to me, we need absolutely a new president. We need a Congress, both House and Senate, that supports smaller government, balanced budget in 10 years, and understands the private sector creates the jobs that matter.
Your opponent has talked about the federal budget in terms of what he calls cut, cap, and balance. Cut the spending, set certain spending limits, and then try to have a balanced budget. Is that a bumper sticker you would put on your car?
No, I wouldn't put that on my car. I think it goes back to let's agree, first of all, on a vision for the United States. The vision that I have put forth, that I would put outside my office, is that the United States of America will reclaim its past glory as the land of opportunity, providing a bright future for our children and grandchildren. I believe everyone, regardless of party affiliation, would say, yeah, I can sign on to that vision. That's not a partisan vision.
But then the how becomes the issue.
Well, okay. So then you go down and say, well, what's the mission of Congress? Well, to me, again, coming out of the business world, the mission of Congress is to govern, abiding by, and in accordance with the Constitution. It's that simple. It's that straightforward. And when my opponent, Kathy Hochul, stood up and said that the Obama administration did not look to the Constitution to justify Obamacare, and hopefully the Supreme Court will say, you're darn right you didn't, and they'll strike it down. But it's a fundamental difference again. I believe you look to the Constitution as you govern, and then overlay 6 core values, which I did as county executive. Firm belief in smaller government, personal accountability and responsibility, local decision-making, fiscal discipline, serving taxpayers, and respecting future generations. Start with that vision, the mission, the 6 core values. Now let's debate things. For instance, can we have runaway deficits and debts, borrowing 42% of every dollar we spend, $5 trillion in new debt over the last 4 years, growing by $4 billion a day? You look at the vision, you look at the mission, the core values, the answer is no. Well, how do we get there? Well, we certainly don't raise taxes because that's inconsistent with the idea of getting the economy moving. And people on the other side who want bigger government, continued deficits, expanding entitlement programs, serving the unions and so forth, everything falls apart for them when you get and you talk about vision, mission, core values. That's what I did in Erie County, and that's what I would bring to Washington, is that kind of business mindset. Let's solve problems by first agreeing on the vision. And if we agree on the core values, some of the nonsense like these runaway deficits, you just dismiss them and say, all right, now we got to make some tough decisions. How do we make sure Social Security and Medicare are there for our seniors? What do we do with entitlement programs that are out of control, like Medicaid and the like? That starts the debate. And understanding I'd be one of 435 legislators, congressmen, I fully understand the difference in that versus being the executive. But I do look forward to working with President Romney on the issues. He comes out of the business world as well, And that language of problem solving is something I would share and something I can bring to Congress.
Don't worry, that Medicaid and Medicare are definitely on the list. We'll get to those in a second. Talk about the debt ceiling. If you were in Congress back when they approved the increase of the debt ceiling, that compromise that kind of defers the cuts and puts in that BRAC commission basically that tries to figure out the cuts, would you have supported that?
Well, I'll rather start right now today of where we're going, because we're going to have to deal with this debt ceiling again and
right.
again and again. What I would insist upon is we have to agree that we will balance the budget in the next 10 years, not the next 20, 30, 40 years. Our debts have ballooned out of control. We have to have it balanced in the next 10. As long as there is a plan to get a balanced budget in 10 years with the necessary cuts to get there without raising taxes, then of course you're going to have to vote to increase the debt ceiling, because what I'm talking about is a balanced budget in 10 years. We can't do it overnight. Practically, pragmatically, we all know we can't do it overnight. We're at the debt ceiling. So, of course, you're going to have to deal with that. But I am not going to vote for an increase in the debt ceiling that doesn't include the cuts necessary over 10 years' time to balance the budget and secure Medicare and Social Security. And that's something that I would insist upon. And if that's not there, they're not going to have my vote.
What do you think of government stimulus plans and that which was adopted this past year? Earlier this week, your opponent said that while county executive, you kind of supported it because it brought money to the counties. But now as a congressperson, maybe your focus would be different.
No, I've never supported stimulus programs. I don't believe the government should pick winners or losers. They're Band-Aids. It's desperation. We've seen they did not work. They put some folks to work temporarily, but those jobs weren't permanent jobs. But as county executive serving the taxpayers of Erie County,
you like it when money comes to the county.
I certainly disagreed with the fundamentals of it, but what came to Erie County was a temporary reduction in our Medicaid expense, FMAP, Federal Medicaid Assistance Program. We were the only county that did not spend that money. What we were able to do was balance our budget the old-fashioned way through hard work, cutting 1,200 positions in county government. And by virtue of that, when they reduced our expense, it wasn't like they were sending us a check. They simply reduced our Medicaid expense slightly for 2.5 years. We used that money to pay down debt. We ended up reducing our debt by $120 million. We did it to rebuild a rainy day fund and a taxpayer fund, which did not exist, and that we built to $100 million. In fact, the irony was when Louise Slaughter threatened to sue me as county executive because we did not spend what she called the stimulus money, I reminded her it wasn't stimulus for roads and bridges. It was a temporary reduction in our Medicaid that every county in New York got, every state in the nation got. We stood alone in Erie County during the worst recession since the last Depression, balancing our budget through bringing efficiency to government. And so, no, I've always been opposed to stimulus. I would not be for any stimulus moving forward, but I was serving the taxpayers when they reduced our expenses. Was that a benefit to the taxpayers of Erie County? Yes, it was, but we stood alone in putting that money in the bank and not wasting it.
Are you one of those that would use the word infrastructure improvements as part of stimulus? You say you're not in favor of stimulus. Do we need more infrastructure spending? Because sometimes those two are linked.
Well, right now, the infrastructure in the U.S. is crumbling. There's no doubt we need to have a comprehensive plan both at the state, local, and national level to make sure that we do take care of the infrastructure. And this has to be part of the debate. What we cannot do is continue to pretend we print money in the basement of the White House, saddling our children and grandchildren with unsustainable debts, heading down the same road as Greece, Italy, and Spain. Again, this comes back to 435 congressmen, hopefully a nice majority working with President Romney to have a discussion of how much money is allocated, how do we get a balanced budget in 10 years, and I look forward to being a big part of that debate.
Anytime anyone's talked about federal spending, I think the largest cabinet department right now is agriculture. Address ag spending and farm subsidies, especially in light of the rural nature now of the 27th District.
Well, clearly, one of the biggest businesses in the 27th Congressional District is farming. It's cash crops, it's dairy farming, it's eggs. It is in Wyoming County. We have more cows than people. It's the largest dairy producer in the state. There's immigration issues certainly that are very critical to the dairy farmers. And I look forward to going to Congress to representing those agricultural issues, hardworking Americans that know what it's like to get up early in the morning and work hard. And frankly,
do we have too many farm subsidies?
No, I'm not concerned about what we're doing in the area of crop insurance, making sure we have stable milk prices. The thing I don't understand is how in a farm bill, the biggest chunk of it, more than 75% of the farm bill, is food stamps. To me, food stamps should, if it's a program that we're going to vote on, it should stand alone. And I do think right now you've got a little bit of a case where there are Democrats trying to expand the food stamp program, holding the other parts of the farm bill hostage. And what we really need to do is to uncouple those. But in the meanwhile, this is moving forward. I do like that the new farm bill is extending crop insurance to the fruit farmers. But, one of the entitlement programs, and it is food stamps, and we absolutely need to deal with entitlement programs across the board. And one of my 6 core values of personal accountability, personal responsibility, says to me we need to look at cutting many of the entitlement programs. And certainly one thing we need to look at is the fraud, waste, and abuse, whether that's in food stamps or Medicaid.
All right, we'll get to all of that again in just a little bit here. We are way late for our commercial break. We'll take a pause for that, pick up with some news headlines as well. Chris Collins is here. He's running in the GOP primary on Tuesday in the 27th Congressional District. You pick between him and David Bellavia, and the winner goes on to challenge incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul in November. More with Chris Collins straight ahead. It's Hardline on News Radio 930 AM and 107.7 FM WBEN. If you're a Republican, you really have 2 big races coming up on Tuesday. One of them is who will go against Kirsten Gillibrand in the United States Senate. You got 3 choices there: George Maragos, Bob Turner, or Wendy Long. And then the marquee race around here is that new 27th Congressional District. It's the one that Kathy Hochul will be in. She's currently the 26th district. Basically, the race on Tuesday will decide who runs against Kathy Hochul. Last hour, you heard from one of those choices, David Bellavia. This hour, we're going to hear more from Chris Collins. Tax reform. We only have a quick 30 seconds here before the news, but how much of a priority is that? Do you think, as part of rejiggering the U.S. economy, changing what the federal government does, we got to attack taxes?
Yeah, we need a flatter, fairer, and lower tax burden. Today, the United States is the highest taxed country in the world at 35% for small business and individuals. The average around the world is 25%. You have countries like Ireland at 12.5%. When you wonder why jobs are leaving, the government today is pushing those jobs offshore with a 35% tax rate, a big difference between Obama, Hochul, and myself. They want to increase that 35 to something like 40. I want to cut it to 25.
All right. That's probably another one of those devils in the details conversations. We'll have it on the other side of the news. Chris Collins is here. More with him in a bit. It's Hardline on News Radio 930 AM and 107.7 FM WBEN. It's Hardline on News Radio 930 AM, 107.7 FM WBEN. This is Dave Debo. Chris Collins is here for the balance of this hour. Coming up, by the way, on Meet the Press, Florida Senator Marco Rubio talking about not only the possibility of him maybe being Mitt Romney's running mate, but he's got a book called An American Son. It chronicles his rise through immigration to the top of the political ladder that he sits now with the U.S. Senate. So he'll be there. They'll have their usual roundtables as well. That comes up at 12 noon. Enough time between now and then, though, to put more questions, more issues to Chris Collins. Before the break, we touched on tax reform. Tell me more. What needs to be done with the U.S. tax code? Do we go to a flat tax? Do we eliminate all the exemptions? What are your thoughts there?
We do need a flatter, fairer tax. It starts with reducing taxes on small business to 25%, which is what you see around the world. We're incentivizing through the tax code businesses to leave. That is a must. But also, in order to do that, we need to take the myriad of deductions and so forth. We need to simplify them. And if we have a lower rate, I believe that's not going to be a problem. We need to make sure we maintain the deduction for mortgage interest and also for health insurance. One change I would make, frankly, is to allow individuals, seniors and other individuals that are paying part of their health insurance, a tax deduction for that, which corporations already have. And it makes no sense to me that a corporation can deduct their health insurance premiums. People working for corporations put them through what's called a Section 125 cafeteria plan, which is pre-tax. But individuals and seniors are paying them out of their pocket. I would make that change. I'd make sure we had the mortgage interest deduction, but then, frankly, a lot of the other deductions we'd have to look at, ending with a flatter, fairer tax with 25% being the top rate.
And when you say that, you're talking about the individual side and the corporate side?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, there's, in the case of small businesses, 80+% of all small businesses are subchapter S and limited liability companies where the corporation's income flows through the personal tax return of the owners. So they are linked together. You really can't have a significant difference there. And that's why the top rate needs to be 25% individually and for business, because most small businesses are flowing through an individual tax return.
When she ran for the seat, Assemblywoman Jane Corwin, in one of the debates I particularly remember, made the distinction between subsidies for large oil companies, and she didn't necessarily want that, but thought we needed to keep them for the smaller, emerging, developing drilling companies. You agree?
Well, I'll go back to, I don't believe government should pick winners and losers. We saw the money that was wasted on Solyndra. We see money being flushed down the toilet, money that we don't have, with the government attempting to pick winners and losers. I'm a free market individual that says if the technology's there, it should not need a subsidy. If it needs a subsidy, that means it's not ready. And we need to get the government, because we're in such massive debt in running these deficits, out of the business of picking winners and losers. And subsidies, in fact, are a way of picking winners and losers. I'm more a free market individual that says if we're not ready for it, well, then we're not ready for it.
All right. I want to try and do rapid fire on a couple of these issues. I know as county executive, obviously, Medicaid was a burden that a county had to bear. I also know that is more of a state issue, perhaps, than a federal issue. But are there things that the federal government can address in regard to Medicaid?
Well, I think certainly the idea of anyone that's on the entitlement programs having to pass, drug testing. If they're going to get government entitlements, which is Medicaid, then I think we need to make sure that they're deserving of them. And you're right; it's the state level where our Medicaid is completely out of control in New York, to the point it took 100% of the property tax in Erie County. I do like the idea of block granting the monies currently at the federal government back to the states and really turn it over to the states completely. I believe, the federal government should be more limited. They've been expansive under Obama, and certainly Medicaid would be one. I would favor the block grant approach. Let New York decide. If New York wants the Cadillac program we have now, well, then we're going to have to pay for it, which certainly is the case today compared to the rest of the country. Let the voters in the state decide the direction. Let's not have the federal government dictating to us.
And I have to admit, I always get a little confused. Medicaid being aid to the poor, Medicare being insurance later for the elderly. Now
well,
let's address Medicare, because that was certainly an issue during the special election that put Kathy Hochul in place.
Well, Medicare, they may call it an entitlement. I don't consider it that. It's a benefit, just like Social Security, that taxpayers and workers have paid for through their payroll tax their entire working lives. I think that's a very important distinction. The problem today on Medicare is where Barack Obama and Kathy Hochul, through Obamacare, want to take $500 billion out of Medicare, and they're doing it by effectively ending Medicare Advantage, which is what Western New Yorkers come to depend on, having Blue Cross Blue Shield, Univera, and Independent Health run the program. Obamacare takes $133 billion out of that program, effectively ending it and transferring that back to the federal government. And I can tell you, when I talk to seniors, they want no part of that. And the other thing it does, it significantly reduces reimbursement to doctors. Well, right now, we need the doctors to serve Medicare patients. You start cutting their reimbursement by 30%, you run the risk they're not going to take Medicare patients at all. So Obamacare has to go. Hopefully the Supreme Court will do it. But the biggest difference right now is Kathy Hochul and the president ending Medicare Advantage and taking away income from the doctors.
She campaigned on the whole idea of Republicans and the quote-unquote Ryan plan taking away Medicare, though. Let's explain the Ryan plan. Where do you stand on it?
Well, it comes back to, again, Kathy Hochul not admitting now that she would end Medicare Advantage and take $500 billion out of Medicare. Frankly, we have to make sure, and I would stand very strong, we would make no changes to Medicare or Social Security for anyone currently retired or anyone nearing retirement age that have been planning their retirement, that you can't pull that rug out from under them.
But for the future recipients, it would be some sort of privatization where their money goes elsewhere?
Well, in the future, what do we know today factually? That Medicare on the current road would be insolvent in 12 years. Social Security would be insolvent in 20 to 24 years. We know we can't get there. So let's start again. Let's have that debate where we say, first of all, we won't touch it for current seniors. We won't touch it for anyone nearing retirement age. But we will have to have a discussion of what changes will have to be made. There will have to be changes to make these programs solvent. The worst thing you can do is do nothing and have them become insolvent in what's a scary short time.
All right. The next on my list, I've got about 5 or 6 here that I want to just try and hit real quickly. Abortion.
Well, I have said before that as a member of Congress, I will have 100% pro-life voting record, and clearly the issue that just came out about abortions to determine the sex of your child. I can't imagine why anyone would support it, although Kathy Hochul did. I would certainly vote against any such nonsense of letting someone determine the sex of their child through abortion. But I'm running on economic issues of more jobs, less spending, energy independence, and repeal of Obamacare. But I don't mind answering that question.
These votes will come up. That's the only reason I want them on the
correct.
table. Gun control.
I've always been a strong advocate, always will be, of Second Amendment rights. I've had a carry permit for 25 years. I have 4 pistols, including my dad's 2 from World War II. My son and I have always enjoyed target shooting, whether it's shotguns, rifles, or pistols. I had the support of the NRA back in 1998 when I did run for Congress, and I've answered their questionnaire. I'm very confident I'll have the support of the NRA, and I am a strong advocate for Second Amendment rights, always have been, always will be.
Address real briefly some of the charges that came from the opposing campaign involving your support of a Bloomberg campaign or Bloomberg proposal, Mayor Michael Bloomberg in New York City, looking at the idea of possibly adding on.
Yeah, well, early when I came into office, there was something that came across my desk called the Bloomberg law against illegal guns.
And you supported it as county executive?
As county executive, we signed on to the law that was aimed at least the title said illegal guns. We fairly certain, fairly soon found out it was not about illegal guns. It was just the opposite, at which point, we said, oh, we made a mistake. We got our name off of it. We disavowed it. And certainly the NRA understands that we thought it was something it wasn't. When we found out what it was, we disavowed it and moved on.
Energy policy. What does the U.S. need to do there?
Well, simply put, we have to have energy independence in the next 10 years, which, again, if you look at Obama and Hochul, they're going in the wrong direction. We need to build the Keystone Pipeline. We need more drilling on federal lands. We need more drilling offshore. We need to promote the Marcellus Shale. And we do need to admit that nuclear is safe, and that's got to be part of our energy policy. So it's a combination, and it starts with the vision again. Energy independence in 10 years. It's like putting a man on the moon. We're going to get there. Now, if we all agree we need to get there, let's stop the nonsense that the Obama administration has on the Keystone Pipeline and shutting down drilling on federal lands and offshore. Let's get our country moving.
I hear what you said about wanting to concentrate on economics, but we have to touch briefly on foreign policy. What's the biggest threat to America right now?
Well, I do think it's terrorism. I mean, that's there's 2 issues. It's Iran getting nuclear capabilities, and it's Al Qaeda and the threat of terrorists who are trying to take away our standard of living. And certainly that's why we are in Afghanistan. The mission there is to defeat the Taliban and put an end to Al Qaeda. We need to stand very strong with Israel on the nuclear weapons programs in Iran, where we have a president today who waffles on that. I firmly believe that one of our biggest allies is Israel. We need to make it very clear to the rest of the world we stand in lockstep with Israel, and we will not allow Iran to gain nuclear capabilities.
It's maybe more of a presidential decision than one Congress would deal with, but do you think they should arm the rebels in Syria?
I think we should understand what's going on in Syria is unacceptable and stand with other nations around the world in assisting the rebels in ending the tyranny in that country. But it should not be America sending troops to Syria. But again, let's go back to our role in the world, and let's look to others like China, who seem to just stand on the sideline and not get involved, even though they're stealing our jobs. They're stealing our jobs, manipulating currency, stealing IP. We just need to make sure that the U.S. is clear. We're not going to put our own troops in harm's way, but we're also going to stand with other countries and not allow that tyranny and massacre to continue.
What do you think of the troop levels currently and the plans to change them in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, in Iraq, we've withdrawn our troops.
Theoretically out.
Yeah, with the exception of some advisors. The issue now in Afghanistan is the president keeps changing his commanders. He's politicized it. The commander-in-chief should say, what's our mission? Mission, defeat the Taliban and end al-Qaeda's reign of terror.
Sure.
Well, that's all fine and good. Now let your commanders execute that, and when it's achieved, then we pull our troops out. And we've got a president who keeps changing the commanders, one of them because he didn't like his political stance. He's micromanaging to a fault. And we have military commanders that know what they're doing. Here's the mission. Let's accomplish it. Let's get out.
Really for you, and this might be a way we can wrap things up after the break here. Really for you, I hear sort of a theme here. Set the goal first and then let the policy, be they a policy over here or a smaller one over there, kind of coalesce behind the broader idea.
Well, like we did in Erie County with 25 commissioners, we set the policy and then we let the commissioners, whether it was parks or senior services or social services, go execute without micromanaging, but understanding we're going to report back on how we're achieving our mission. Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head.
All right. On the other side of the break, some closing comments from Chris Collins. Again, he's on the ballot on Tuesday. If you're a Republican, there is a primary there to decide whether he or David Bellavia moves on in November to challenge Kathy Hochul in the new 27th District. More with him in just a bit. Meet the Press comes your way at 12 noon. It's Hardline on News Radio 930 AM and 107.7 FM WBEN. Closing moments with Chris Collins on the ballot on Tuesday in a GOP primary to decide who challenges Kathy Hochul in November for the 27th Congressional District. Chris, as a way of kind of wrapping it up here, talk to me about what kind of Republican you are. Are you a huge reformer? Are you a Tea Party guy? Are you more of a moderate? Are you a mainstream Republican? How do you see yourself in that regard?
I'm an American taxpayer, a father and grandfather concerned about the future of our children, understanding we need smaller government, we need less spending, we need to empower people through personal responsibility and accountability. I'd like to call myself a common sense American who is a proud Republican, a proud conservative, but I'm a very concerned parent and grandparent, and it's that concern that's taking me to Washington because I want to work to do my part to help restore the promise of the American dream for our children and grandchildren.
One of the comments that came in on Facebook when I mentioned that you and David were going to be on the program this week, someone wrote in and said, I'd like to know how far out mainstream Republicans think each of these candidates are willing to go. We all hear Washington is broken and there needs to be change, yet there is no real change. To a guy like that who looks at government and says, everyone talks change, but change never comes, what do you say?
Look at what we accomplished in 4 years in Erie County, the most insolvent county in the state of New York with a hard control board and no money in the bank. Look at what we accomplished with a legislature that was lined up 12-3 against me. And I would say that my administration's results speak for themselves. We did things no one thought was possible, bringing efficiency to government, and that's part of the resume I'm presenting to the Republican voters in the primary next Tuesday, and respectfully asking for their vote to take the challenge against Barack Obama and Kathy Hochul and be the next member of Congress.
Do you think there are areas where, I hate even to put it this way, do you think Republicans and Democrats can get along?
Well, I know we can because we start with a vision of saying, let's do this for our children and grandchildren. We did it in Erie County, and that's why I like to start with a vision, core values, and let's set aside the D and the R, and let's get a common ground on the direction we're trying to go. And while we're going to have our differences, I don't dwell on the differences. I dwell on the vision and how we get it done.
And again, you had mentioned at the top of the program, when it comes right down to issues, for you, there isn't a lot of difference between you and your opponent.
It's not the issues, it's the resume, it's the experience that I bring to this race more so than anything else, and that's what we've talked about for 3 months.
All right, and the closing comment, you mentioned this off air, and I think you said it on air. You just need to underline. You want people to know that Tuesday is a day to vote.
June 26th, unusual day, next Tuesday. Let's exercise our American right, and I think an American obligation to go vote on Tuesday.
All right, very good. Chris, thanks for coming on in.
Dave, thank you. Thanks to all the listeners, and great weekend. Have a great one.
All right, that's Chris Collins running against David Bellavia in the GOP primary on Tuesday. That's also the day that Republicans, the other big marquee race, just federal primary, Republicans get to pick a candidate to oppose Kirsten Gillibrand on the Democratic side. Straight ahead, it's Meet the Press. This is News Radio 930 AM, 107.7 FM, WBEN.